September 16th, 1978, the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Grateful Dead are midway through Fire on the Mountain when the moon starts to disappear. Not clouds, not a technical glitch, a total lunar eclipse. Jerry Garcia's guitar cuts through the desert air as the shadow creeps across the moon. And for a moment, thousands of people, deadheads who flew halfway around the world, Egyptian locals who'd never heard of this band, journalists documenting what they thought would be a disaster, all stop and look up. And here's the thing, this shouldn't have happened at all. The Grateful Dead were struggling financially. They just spent over $100,000 they didn't have to haul their entire sound system across the planet. Half the band was strung out. The Egyptian government almost shut them down. The first night was a technical catastrophe. But on that third night, under that eclipse, something shifted. And 47 years later, people still talk about it like it was a religious experience. So how did a jam band from San Francisco end up playing the pyramids during a lunar eclipse? And why did they risk everything to do it? The answer starts 2 years earlier, with a bass player and a weird idea about power. 1976. The Grateful Dead are in an interesting place. Their shows still sell out, the Deadhead community is growing, but commercially they're being written off. The music industry is moving toward punk and disco. The Dead are being dismissed as hippie nostalgia, relics from a decade everyone's trying to forget. And that's when Phil Lesh, the band's bass player, gets obsessed with something he calls places of power. Sacred sites. Ancient locations where something about the geology, the history, the energy, whatever you want to call it, creates a different kind of experience. Stonehenge, the pyramids, places humans have been drawn to for thousands of years. Phil starts telling the band they need to play these locations. Not because it'll sell records, because it might change the music itself. Phil later explained his thinking. It sort of became my project because I was one of the first people in the band on the trip of playing at places of power. The pyramids are like the obvious #1 choice. No matter what anyone thinks they might be, there is definitely some kind of mojo about the pyramids. Most bands would have laughed this off. But the Grateful Dead weren't most bands. They'd already dosed an entire generation with LSD, turned their concerts into social experiments, and built a business model around taping and trading their shows. Weird ideas were kind of their thing. Mickey Hart, the drummer, was immediately on board. In a 2020 interview, he explained how it happened. In the early days, we always pondered playing some sacred places. In about '76, Phil and I had the idea that we needed somebody to take us to Egypt. So we went to see Bill Graham. Bill Graham, the most powerful rock promoter in America. The guy who could make anything happen if he wanted to. And he had serious doubts about the whole plan. Here's what most people don't know about the Egypt plan. It wasn't just logistically difficult, it was technically unprecedented. The Grateful Dead didn't travel light. Their sound system was massive. State-of-the-art PA equipment, professional recording gear, a setup that required multiple trucks just to move it around California. Now they wanted to take it to Egypt? A country with inconsistent power infrastructure. In the middle of the desert, next to a 4,000-year-old monument that the Egyptian government was extremely protective about. Bill Graham tried to understand the scope. When that didn't dissuade them, he tried to figure out how to actually do it. First problem, power. The Sound and Light Theater at Giza didn't have enough electricity to run the Dead system. Not even close. They'd need an enormous diesel generator, which meant shipping a generator from the United States to Egypt, which meant customs paperwork, import permits, and convincing Egyptian officials that yes, a rock band really needed this much power. According to the official Dead.net release about the concerts, another major challenge was the minimal amount of power available at Giza, which required the band to bring in an enormous generator to power its state-of-the-art sound and recording equipment. Second problem, the Egyptian government. They'd never allowed a rock concert at the pyramids, ever. The Dead would be the first, which meant months of negotiations, meetings with cultural ministers, and somehow convincing a government that a band associated with LSD and countercultural chaos could be trusted next to one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Third problem: money. The whole operation was going to cost over $100,000. And here's the kicker. The band decided to donate all ticket proceeds to Egyptian charities and the Department of Antiquities. They were funding the entire trip out of pocket, for no profit. Jerry Garcia, in an interview recorded at Giza, had this to say: "Coming here's a dream we've had for a long time. Not so much idealism, more a delicate state of anarchy. Anarchy in Egypt. God knows how we've managed to actually get here. Allah be praised." That laugh tells you everything. Even Jerry couldn't quite believe they'd pulled it off. But here's what the technical nightmare was really about. It wasn't just logistics. The Grateful Dead were trying to prove something. By 1978, the narrative around the band had calcified. They were hippie nostalgia. Grateful Dead concerts were where aging flower children went to relive the 60s. The music press had moved on. The industry had moved on. Playing the Pyramids wasn't going to change their commercial fortunes. Everyone knew that. But it would be undeniable. It would be something no other band could claim. It would be a statement that the Grateful Dead were still doing things no one else would even attempt. This happened during an era when punk was declaring rock dinosaurs extinct, when disco dominated the charts. The Egypt concerts were the Dead's way of saying, "We're not competing in your game anymore. We're playing a completely different one." Phil Lesh understood this on a deeper level. His whole places of power theory wasn't just New Age mysticism. It was about context, about whether the location of a performance could fundamentally alter the music itself. And Egypt wasn't just any location. It was the cradle of civilization. The place where written language, monumental architecture, organized religion, where human culture as we know it essentially began. Ken Kesey, the author and LSD pioneer who helped birth the whole psychedelic movement, traveled with the band to Egypt. He understood what Phil was getting at. Kesey talked about the pyramids as a convergence point, a place where thousands of years of human intention had been focused into stone. The Dead weren't just playing a concert. They were conducting an experiment. Could they tap into something by being there? Could the weight of 4,000 years of history change the way Jerry played guitar? The way the crowd listened? The way the whole experience unfolded? You can dismiss this as hippie nonsense. A lot of people did. But here's the thing. The people who were there say something actually happened. September 14th, 1978. Opening night. And it was a disaster. The sound system, which had been meticulously tested in California, suddenly had problems in the Egyptian heat and dust. Feedback issues, power fluctuations. The mix was muddy. Deadheads who'd flown from San Francisco expecting Transcendence were confused. This wasn't better than a normal show. It was worse. The band knew it too. A Deadhead on Reddit later joked about the performance. For me, it's in keeping with the boys' tradition of blowing the big ones. Phil Lesh had actually used that phrase himself. The Dead had a tendency to get so overwhelmed by the significance of a moment that they'd overthink it and the music would suffer. Night 2, September 15th, was better. The technical crew figured out the power issues. The band started to relax. But it still wasn't the transcendent experience everyone had been promised. And then came September 16th, the final night, a full moon. And according to astronomical calculations, a total lunar eclipse would occur during the second set. The band brought out Hamza El Din, an Egyptian oud player and musicologist who'd been sitting in with them throughout the trip. They started with his composition, Ollin Arageed, hypnotic Nubian drumming that Mickey Hart locked into immediately. The groove built, the crowd swayed, and then, without a break, the band transitioned into Fire on the Mountain. That's when the eclipse started. One deadhead who was there described it like this: "The moon began to darken just as Jerry hit the main riff. By the time we were deep into the jam, it was blood red. I'm not religious, but that felt like church." The music stretched. Jerry's guitar spiraled. The rhythm section locked into something primal. And overhead, the moon went dark, then red, then slowly came back. Phil Lesh, excitedly talking to someone after the show, said, "Did you hear that Owsley feedback when the eclipse hit? I thought the pyramid was going to levitate. Completely out there." That levitation comment became part of the legend. No one actually saw the pyramid move. But in that moment, in that state, under that sky, people believed it could have. That's what Phil Lesh was talking about. That's the places of power thing. Not magic, just the collision of music, location, history, and timing, creating something that couldn't have happened anywhere else. When the Dead family packed up and left Egypt a few days later, they were financially devastated. The whole trip had cost over $120,000. They wouldn't recoup it from ticket sales, they'd donated those. The recordings from the shows wouldn't be officially released for 30 years. By any normal business metric, Egypt was a catastrophe. And then, less than 2 weeks after the concerts, something strange happened. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin met at Camp David and signed a peace treaty, the first major peace agreement between Israel and an Arab nation. Tour coordinator Alan Trist later mused in the liner notes for the official release, "Unbeknownst to the band at the time, these shows would soon have a remarkable historical context. One has to wonder if the Dead's message of peace and love might have had some sort of impact on the negotiations." Probably not. But the timing was weird enough that people noticed. The real impact, though, was on the band's mythology. The Egypt shows became sacred lore in the Deadhead community. If you became a fan in the 80s or 90s, you'd hear whispers about Egypt, about the eclipse, the pyramid, the insane gamble the band took. It proved something the Dead had always believed, that the experience mattered more than the business, that taking risks, even financially ruinous ones, was worth it if it created something people would remember. One fan summarized it perfectly. "Are they the best shows? Objectively not. But when your friends and family ask what makes the Dead so great, you can tell them they played the fucking pyramids, man." And that's the thing about the Grateful Dead's Egypt adventure. It wasn't about good business. It wasn't even really about perfect performances. The shows were technically flawed, the recordings are rough, and the band nearly bankrupted themselves. It was about the audacity, about believing that rock and roll could still mean something beyond sales and airplay. About taking a weird idea, places of power, ancient energy, whatever, and following it all the way to the desert. 47 years later, no band has done anything quite like it. The Pyramids have never hosted an